A very good day to you. Let's continue with our topic today, the formation of contract, offer and ITT. What is ITT? ITT means invitation to trade. Okay, so today we are going to learn about invitation to trade or ITT. So first, it is important to distinguish an offer from an invitation to trade. Okay, so an invitation to trade is not an offer. Instead, it is an invitation to bargain or negotiate. So when a person makes an invitation to trade, they are showing willingness to do business, but they do not tend to be legally bound at that stage. The purpose of an invitation to trade is to invite the other party to make an offer. Only when that offer is accepted does a binding contract exist. So simply, when we say invitation to trade, means it is an invitation to make an offer. And there is no legal obligation yet, and there is no contract at this stage. Okay? So I give you a simple example. You go to a shop, let's say Orange, okay, Orange shop, and there they display a smartphone with a price tag of 2,000 ringgit. So the display is not an offer. It is an invitation to trade. Now, when a customer brings the phone to the counter, the customer is making the offer. So it is up to the shop whether to accept or to reject. So a contract is formed only when the shop accepts the offer. Okay, so the key point for you to remember here is that invitation to trade is not an offer. It shows an intention to negotiate, and it is not to be bound yet. It invites the other party to make an offer. So no contract exists at the invitation to trade stage. Okay, so let's look at the next slide here. Offer versus invitation to trade. In contract law, it is very important to distinguish an offer from an invitation to trade. Meaning of an offer. Okay, so an offer is an expression of willingness by the offerer to enter into a legally binding contract on a specific terms with the intention that it will become binding once accepted. Only an offer can be accepted. Acceptance of an offer creates a binding contract. Okay, so now let's look at invitation to trade. An invitation to trade is not an offer. It is an invitation to others to make an offer. It shows willingness to negotiate, but there is no intention to be legally bound at that stage. So, an invitation to trade cannot be accepted to form a contract. It merely invites the other party to make an offer. So the key difference here is that when there is an offer and it can be accepted, so the contract will form. However, invitation to trade is only an invite and offer, so there is no contract yet. Right? So let's look at invitation to trade. Okay. Now let's look at common everyday situation where something may look like an offer, but it is actually an invitation to trade. Now, the Contract Act 1950 does not specifically define invitation to trade. So, English law principles are applied in Malaysia for this topic. Now, an invitation to trade is made when one party shows willingness to negotiate, but does not intend to be legally bound at that stage. Invites the other party to make an offer. So some common examples of invitation to trade. Okay, So the law recognizes the following as an invitations to treat, not offer. Number one, goods displayed in a shop. So goods displayed in the shop window or on shelves are not offer. They are invitations for customers to make offers at the counter. Number two, advertisements. Most advertisements are invitations to treat, inviting customers to make offers to buy. Number three, tender. A request for tenders is usually an invitation to treat, inviting parties to submit offer. Number four, quotation. A price quotation is generally not an offer, but an invitation for the buyer to make an offer. Number five, auction. An auctioneer's call for bids is an invitation to treat. Each bid made by bidders is an offer. Okay, so let me give you a simple example for you to understand. Let's say there is a shop displays a television with a price tag of 2,000. Now, that display is an invitation to treat. But when the customer says, I'll buy this for 2,000, here the customer is making an offer. So it's up to the shop whether to accept or to reject the offer. Now, a contract is formed only upon acceptance by the shop. All right? Now, let's look at goods displayed in the shop, which is a common examples of invitations to treat. Now, when goods are displayed in the shop window or on shelf with price tag, this display is not an offer. Instead, it is an invitation to treat. This means the shop owner is inviting customers to make an offer. The shop owner is not legally bound to sell the goods at that stage. So how a contract is formed? Let's look at step by step. Number one, the display of goods. The shop displays a book priced at £7.99. So this is an invitation to treat. Next, customer action. The customer picks up the book and brings it to the cashier. The customer is making an offer to buy at £7.99. And then after that acceptance happened, where the cashier accepts the money, so the shop accepts the offer. So there is a binding contract. So this binding contract is formed at this point. So why the law treat it as invitation to treat? If display were treated as an offer, the shop would be forced to sell to everyone, even when stock runs out of or price is incorrect. Therefore, the law protects sellers by treating displays as invitations to treat. Okay. So let's look at a case. Pharmaceutical Society of Great Britain versus Boots Cash Chemist. Okay, a case 1952. This is an important case on invitation to treat. So the legal issue here is the key question to this case was, is the display of goods on shop shelves an offer or an invitation to treat? So let's look at fact of the case. Boots introduced a shelf service system in their shop. So the customer selected goods from the shelves and brought them to the cashier. Some goods were poisons, which by law had to be sold under a pharmacist's supervision. The issue was when the sale took place. When is it? Is it at the shelf or at the cashier? So the decisions of the court is that the display of goods on shelves is only an invitation to treat, not an offer. The customer makes the offer when selecting the goods and bringing them to the cashier. The contract is formed only when the cashier accepts the customer's money. Therefore, the sale does not take place at the shelf. It takes place at the counter under the supervision. Okay, so the legal principle here is that goods displayed in a shop are an invitation to treat. The offer is made by the customer. Acceptance occurs when the cashier takes payment. A binding contract is formed only at acceptance. Okay. So let's look at another case, invitation to treat. Okay, Fisher versus Bell, 1961. This is also another important case on invitation to treat. So the legal issue in this case is that does displaying an item with a price in a shop window amount to an offer for sale? So let's look at facts of the case. The defendant displayed a flick knife in his shop window with price tag. Under the law, it was illegal to offer flick knives for sale. The defendant was charged for offering the knife for sale. So the court of appeal held that displaying goods in shop window, even with a price tag, is not an offer. It is only an invitation to treat. Therefore, the defendant had not offered the knife for sale, so he was not guilty of the offense. So the court clearly stated the display of an article with the price tag in a shop window is merely an invitation to treat, not an offer. So remember, under the legal principles here, a shop window display is an invitation to treat. It invites the customers to make an offer, and no contract is formed until the seller accepts the buyer's offer. Okay, so let's continue. Now let's look at advertisement. Advertisement as an invitation to treat. Now, as a general rule, advertisements are not offer. They are usually treated as invitations to treat. This means the advertiser is inviting others to make an offer. The advertiser does not intend to be legally bound simply by placing the advertisement. So let's look at the first case, Harris versus Nickerson, a case at 1873. So the principle of the case is that an advertisement stated that office furniture would be sold at a certain place and date. The court held that the advertisement was only an invitation to treat. It merely informed the public of an event, so it was not an offer to sell to everyone. Another case, second case, Coelho versus Public Services Commission, 1964. The principle of the case, an advertisement for a job vacancy was published. The court held that the advertisement was an invitation to treat. The applications submitted by qualified person were the offers. So the commission was not obliged to accept any application. So simply said that advertisement is an invitation to treat. Applications or response will be an offer, and the employer or the seller will decide whether to accept or to reject. Next, let's look at tender. Okay, tender as an invitation to treat. A notice or announcement inviting tenders is not an offer. It is treated as an invitation to treat. This means the party inviting tender is inviting others to submit offers. There is no intentions to be legally bound just by issuing the tender notice. Okay, so how tenders work? Let me give you a simple explanation for your easy understanding. Number one, the party publishes a notice inviting tenders. Okay, so this is an invitation to treat. Then step number two, interested parties will submit their tender documents. So by submitting their tender documents, this is an offer. And then the third step, the party calling for tenders has the right to accept or reject any offer. A contract is formed only when one tender is accepted. So there is no obligation to accept the lowest or any tender unless expressly stated. Okay, so the key point for you to remember here is that invitation to tender is equals to invitation to treat. Tender submitted is an offer. Party inviting tenders may accept or reject. No contract until acceptance of the tender. Tender notice alone creates no legal obligation. Let's look at a case. Still under tender, Spencer versus Harding. Fact of the case. The defendant published an announcement inviting tenders for the sale of certain goods. The plaintiff submitted the highest bid for the goods. Despite this, the defendant rejected the plaintiff's tender. The plaintiff claimed that the defendant was bound to accept the highest offer. So what is the legal issue here? Does an invitation to tender create a legal obligation to accept the highest or any tender? So the decisions of the court says that an invitation to tender is only an invitation to treat. Each tender submitted is merely an offer. The party inviting tenders has the right to accept or reject any tender, even the highest one. So no binding contract exists until a tender is accepted. Therefore, the defendant was entitled to reject the plaintiff offer. Okay, so legal principle for you to remember here is that invitation to tender is not an offer. Tender submitted is an offer. However, contract only forms when there is an acceptance. So there is no duty to accept the highest tender unless expressly stated. Now let's look at the next one. Now we are going to look at price list and quotations under contract law. A price list or quotation is generally not an offer. Instead, it is treated as an invitation to treat. This means that it provides early or preliminary information and it invites the prospective buyers to make an offer. There is no intentions to be legally bound at this stage. So what is the purpose of price list or quotation? The purpose is to allow buyers to compare prices, to help buyers decide whether to make an offer, to give sellers the flexibility to negotiate. So because of this, the seller is not obliged to sell at the stated price. They may accept, reject, or make a counter offer. So the legal effect. So price list or quotation is only an invitation to treat. The buyer's order will become the offer. And if there's any acceptance from the seller, then the contract is formed. Until the seller accepts, there is no binding contract. Okay. So let's look at a case, a very important case on quotations and invitation to treat, which is Harvey versus Fassi. Now let's look at the fact of the case. The parties exchanged telegram messages. Okay, the plaintiff, Harvey, he asked, "Will you sell us bumper whole pen?" The defendant, which is Fassi, he replied, "The lowest price for it is 900. Plaintiff then replied, "I agree to buy it for 900, as asked by you." After this, the defendant did not reply further. The plaintiff claimed that a valid contract has been formed. Okay, so the legal issue here is that did the defendant's statement of price amount to an offer so that the plaintiff's reply create a binding contract? So the court decision says that there was no valid contract. Why? The defendant's reply stating the lowest price is 900 was only a quotation, not an offer. A quotation is merely an invitation to treat. So the plaintiff's last message was actually an offer to buy. The defendant never accepted that offer. So since there was no acceptance, then there is no contract was formed. Okay, so remember, under legal principle, a quotation of price is not an offer. It is only an invitation to treat. The buyer's response is the offer. A contract arises only upon acceptance. Let's look at another case. Creston Corporation Sendirian Berhad versus Edward Leong and others. This is a Malaysian case that clearly explains the legal positions of price quotation. Now, fact of the case, the plaintiff requested a price quotation from the respondent. The respondent provided the quotation, and relying on that quotation, the plaintiff later issued printing orders. The dispute arose as to whether the binding contract already existed. So, what is the legal issue here? Does giving a price quotation amount to an offer so that a contract is formed when orders are placed? So, the court decision says that the price quotation was only a supply of information. The quotation was an invitation to treat, not an offer. The printing orders made by the plaintiff were offers. These offers required acceptance by the respondents. So since there was no acceptance, so there is no binding contract existed. So under legal principles, a quotation is not an offer. It merely invites the other party to make an offer. The order placed based on the quotation is the offer. A contract is formed only upon acceptance. Let's look at another part of invitation to treat, which is auctioneer. Okay, auction. This is also under invitation to treat. When an auctioneer invites bids, this action is not an offer. It is only an invitation to treat. This means the auctioneer is inviting bidders to make offers. The auctioneer is not legally bound at this stage. Now, how an auction works, I give you a simple explanation. Number one, auctioneer invites bids. So this part, it is an invitation to treat. Okay. Next, each bid made by a bidder. So this is an offer. So the last one will be auctioneer's acceptance. It occurs when the hammer falls. So only at that moment, the offer is accepted, a binding contract is formed. Okay. Under the legal provision, according to Section 10 of the Auction Sales Act, a sale by public auction is complete when the hammer falls or when the auctioneer announces its completion to another customary manner. So before the hammer falls, any bid may be withdrawn. The auctioneer may reject any bid. Okay, so let's look at this example. For example, you may heard these conversations as follow. Okay, between Nora and Isma. So Nora says, Isma, I'd like to sell my earphone to you. Earphone to you. Are you interested? So this is an invitation to treat. So Isma replied, I'll pay you 50 ringgit for it. So here, this is an offer by Isma. If later Nora replied, oh, that's not enough. I want 100 ringgit for it. And then Isma said, the highest I can give is 90 ringgit. So there's a counter offer here. Okay. So Nora said, okay, deal. When can you provide me the money? So this is an acceptance by Nora. So what is the effect of this case, of this situation? So if Nora refused to sell the phone to Isma, Isma may sue Nora for breach of contract. Okay, because acceptance already happened. So that's the end of today's topic, invitation to treat. I will see you again on our next topic. Thank you very much.